Hello, this is Ashley McHugh from Insurance Newsnet, and I will be the administrator for today's webinar, Cracking the Code, Attracting the NextGen Client. Moderating the webinar is Susan Roop, Managing Editor at Insurance Newsnet. Susan has been with INN since 2012, following 13 years with NAFA, Pennsylvania, as well as a number of years as a newspaper reporter and editor. She will be speaking with two advisors who have built their practices around serving young adults and showing them how to achieve financial success. Bryan Kuderna is the founder of Kuderna Financial Team in Shrewsbury, New Jersey, and he is still a part of the financial services firm where he started his career back when he was a junior at the College of New Jersey. Bryan has a passion for serving young adults and for discussing financial literacy. He is the author of the book, Millennial Millionaire, A Guide to Become a Millionaire by 30, and followed that up by writing the book, What Should I Do with My Money?, which was published in February of this year. Thomas Kopelman is co-founder of All Street Wealth, based in Indianapolis, a financial planning firm for millennial entrepreneurs and those with equity comp. He wrote the ebook, Top 23 Questions Millennials Ask Me About Money, and he also was named a Top 23 Millennial Financial Advisor by Business Insider. He was named a Top 100 Advisor by Investopedia in 22 and 23. Please ask any questions that you may have in the questions pane during our discussion, and we will get to as many as we can at the end. And with that, I'll turn it over to Susan.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I have two great guests on our webinar today, and I'm really excited to bring them to you. Bryan Kuderna brings his passion for serving the next generation client beyond the office. He is the author of two books, hosts a podcast, writes the weekly Wealth Wisdom blog, and has appeared as a commentator on CNBC and other financial news outlets. Tom Kopelman is an entrepreneur who wants to help other young entrepreneurs. In addition to his advisory practice, he is also a blogger and a content creator. Welcome, Bryan, and welcome, Tom.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
So I want to start out, we have a lot to discuss, and let's start out with this question. What do you believe is the biggest financial issue young adults need help with? And let's start with you, Bryan.
Sure. So I think in my experience, some of the things young professionals are running into right now, first and foremost, I always say it's finding a career and not just a job. So I think a lot of people in their early 20s, they're graduating college, they're trying to find something that they like, they want to find a good payday, they want to find some flexibility, but they might not really be thinking, hey, 10, 20 years down the road, as I go through a lot of different life events, what type of career ultimately do I want to have? So that's one thing with young folks. I really start out there, making sure that they're seeing the big picture. And then financially speaking, usually they're juggling, student loans, which we're all familiar with, credit cards, perhaps, and then talking with their parents about how do I actually move out of home, whether that be to go rent an apartment or maybe buy a condo or something like that. And they're contending with, really high real estate prices right now, higher interest rates. So while they have maybe a higher starting salary than in years past, they can have some fun. They can do a lot of cool things with that. But to take that next big leap of maybe buying their first home is probably quite a bit harder than it was, say, 5 or 10 years ago. So I think those are the things that they're thinking about, moving out, managing credit cards, and student loans are front and center. So we have to kind of juggle those things as we start to talk about a financial plan.
Okay, and those are all things we're going to be digging into a little bit later in this webinar. But Tom,
Sure.
What do you see as the biggest financial issue young adults need help with?
Yeah, I'll say a couple different things, but one thing to expand on that I love that he started with is the job over career. I think a lot of times millennials, or now we have Gen Z, hear this idea that when you switch jobs, you typically get a larger pay increase than staying at your same job, right? I think the statistics say you get a 3% salary increase per year if you stay, 10% if you leave. But that doesn't mean that you're jumping around from like marketing to finance to, a different role. That means that you're probably staying in something that you're learning and becoming really good at, and then just jumping to a different company for like a promotion or a higher level. So I think that for young people, figuring out how to maximize your income is by far the most important thing. I always use the example that I find people coming out of college, they're always talking about investments. They feel like, oh my gosh, how do I maximize my investments? At the end of the day, if you make $50,000 and you save 5%, right? I mean, that's $2,500 a year. Even if you get 100% return, which you're never going to do, that's $2,500. If you grow your income by 10%, you just had $5,000 more, right? So focusing on raising your income and keeping your expenses pretty similar is by far the most important thing to start with. And I think then that kind of leads on the financial side is managing cash flow. This is something that I think everybody has to learn from day one is how do we find a way to have a difference between what we make and what we spend? Because if you don't have any surplus between those two, there's really nothing that you're going to be able to accomplish financially. And so when you hear, hey, I'm making $60,000, understand that doesn't mean you're taking home $5,000, right? You have taxes, you have your 401k, you have health insurance. And so people go in and they make decisions on rent or cars without truly realizing that you're probably taking home 65-ish% of your salary. And it's really easy to overextend yourself on between student loans, a car, and rent or a house to be left with nothing to do. And it's not fun when you don't have any discretionary money to do things that you like.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I've had someone in the financial services business tell me that he believes the industry was not built around serving young adults. And I was wondering if you agree with that and how the industry, and more specifically, how individual advisors such as yourself can do a better job of serving young adults. And Tom, I was wondering your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I would say that's completely true. I think until the last 10 years, and still there's a lot of places where this is true, where the only way that you can work with somebody is by having a set amount of investable assets, right? So if you're young, you're starting a Roth IRA, you got $6,500 in there. 1% of that is $65, right? Like no financial planner is going to choose to work with somebody for $65 a year. You're just not going to get the advice and the time that you want, which is why these subscription models have started to be created of, hey, we have income, we have complexity, we need help. We're willing to pay a financial planner X amount per year to help us. Okay, well, let's break that up monthly to make it as easy as possible. So that's what I've been doing for at least 4 years. Now we work with a space well above the bottom people, but we even have a model that's $1,500. We get younger people, they come in, they get us all their info, they put it into our software, we prepare ahead of time, and then we spend 2 hours with them understanding their goals, where they're trying to go, their company benefits, their income, et cetera. And then we get them a financial plan that they can go put in place for themselves. What I find is for most younger people, they don't really need an ongoing financial planner yet. They typically need a financial plan and they need to figure out what to do. But then there's usually a few years after college where you're doing the same to your 401k, you're paying down your student loans, you're saving for your house, you're building your emergency fund. Maybe you're doing your Roth if you have left over, but until complexity hits, there shouldn't be that many changes, where a lot of times a financial plan can help set you up to be on the right track, because we just don't know what we don't know. School didn't teach us. A lot of our parents face completely different things and we're also bad at money. We just don't know what we don't know, and we need somebody to help guide us on that.
Bryan, what are your thoughts on how the financial services industry could do a better job of serving young clients?
Yep, I still think there's a lot of work to be done that we can help out with, as opposed to just kind of pushing them more to the Robin Hoods of the world and some of the kind of just automated or the do-it-yourself approaches. So the way that I view it, when I came into the business in 2008, I had a mentor that told me, think young and grow old. And what he meant by that is, rather than kind of cherry picking, this 65-year-old retiree that maybe you get a little rollover, you do some estate planning, and, you might only be an advisor there for whatever, 10 or 15 years. He said, if you get a real young, rock star that's ready to go light the world on fire, and you get to go through all those life cycles with them and hold them as a client for perhaps the next 40 years, there's so much work that could be done. There's so many referral opportunities, and there's so many different transactions that could occur as a part of the planning process. So I think there is opportunity there. The way that I view it early on is what I call paid prospecting. So kind of like Tom alluded to, like you're never going to make a fortune selling a term policy or a little DI policy or opening up that Roth IRA. So, I'm happy to take those clients on and recognize that's not a profit center, but that's just creating a bigger and bigger funnel for potential prospects and clientele in the future. So that's, and I've broken down, I have two businesses, essentially, the insurance side and then the wealth management side. On the wealth management side, I have some processes in place where we have $1,000 minimum. And so we can take over the little brokerage account or start the Roth IRA from scratch. We'll do some indexing, things like that, where we're not really making any money, but we're building a relationship. So we have kind of that first tier, and then we have a $50,000 and up, which is where we get more into actively managed portfolios. And it's fun to meet with that young professional and say, hey, we could start over here, develop good habits, have good savings rates. And then in a couple of years, we might graduate into that second tier where now we're getting more hands-on, more actively managed approach. And it gives them a goal to aspire to and to save for. So that's just kind of one thing that I would mention. And another cool caveat I've noticed is not only do you get referred down, it is possible to get referred up. And what I mean by that is you deal with, let's say, a 24-year-old, and maybe they're the first in their family to graduate college. They're settling into their career. You're doing some minor planning for them. And then, oh, by the way, you know, their dad was an electrician that never really gave money a lot of thought, but he works for the union. He's about to retire and he's got a $600,000 annuity through the union. And they're saying, oh, you know, my son here, he's the genius. He went to college. And before you know it, now you're helping out the family and you're doing some of those bigger transactions. And I've had that happen, you know, countless times over the years. So I wouldn't just write off, you know, a young professional. I think there's a lot of different ways you could take that relationship.
Mhm.
And can I add something there?
Sure.
I'm going back to the first point that you were talking about that I love is working with the younger people, grabbing them at an early time. I think the caveat that we have to add, depending on who it is, whether this is an advisor looking at it, is that's a game that you still have to put an effort for. So I think there's a lot of lazy planners who will say, I'll sell you a policy, I'll grab a little investment account, and then they won't talk to you for years. And when you do that, you end up pushing them away to say, well, I thought I had an advisor. They don't care about me. They don't talk to me. Now I'm going to move to somebody who's going to give me the time, where you still have to find the way to still have the touch points, still have the education. It doesn't end up being a funnel if you grab them and then never talk to them for a bunch of years, which obviously I know you do, but I came from a broker dealer where the name of the game was get as many accounts in as you could and then never talk to them again. And I watched time after time them be like, well, now I have a bad viewpoint of this place because they just looked at me as a sales versus as somebody to help.
Yeah. And I think that's where, you know, systems are so important as you build a practice. Because it is true, you're one person, you can only do so much. So in order to keep, you know, that quality of care for each client, where we've been able to do that is by having a team behind us and having things very organized through different things like Smart Office or different, you know, software programs to keep those relationships fresh. But yeah, that's spot on.
Love it.
All right. You know, I'm the mom of a millennial, and I will say that the insurance and financial world sure is different for young adults today than it was for their parents. And I was wondering if you could give us some insights on how you see that's changed. And Bryan, let's start with you.
Sure. So I think first and foremost, of course, is the internet. You know, it's been a game changer. We all know that. And so what that's opened up is just a wealth of information that's out there. And I always tell people you can find a lot of information, but that doesn't mean that you're going to find a lot of wisdom. So you can go on Google and find the answer to anything you want. And you could even pick the answer that you want to hear, which is dangerous because then you're just kind of in this echo chamber talking to yourself. So what I always tell people is it's okay to take a do-it-yourself approach. But just like we have all different professionals that could specialize, I think you'll see as time goes on, as you grow in your career and your family, you appreciate these different specialties. And so you want to take advantage of them, just like you would your doctor, your attorney, your CFP, you know, et cetera. So I think that's kind of a big difference that they have to maybe go through a bit of that learning curve. And just as a side note, I always tell young advisors in our office, I'm like, don't fight it. If you do a seminar, you do a talk and they're like, oh, I can do that on my own. And they're pushing back and forth with you for a half hour of your time. Especially where I'm at in my career, you got to let those go. And that's where I tell them, okay, this is what I do, just so you're aware. And if you want to go try X, Y, and Z on your own, then God bless you. And I wish you well. But if you change your mind, know that the door is always open. You know, we're always happy to help. And, you know, again, it all comes back to those relationships. And so many times, 2-3 years down the road, one reason or another, they come back. And I have my newsletters and my blogs and all that you talked about where I do stay, you know, top of mind. And they say, you know what, I made a mistake, or it's just too much now. I got married, I got a kid. And then before you know it, you may have a new client. So I think managing that lure of do it yourself and the instant gratification that is kind of promoted out there is really key. And I would just say, don't fight the sale, stick to your guns, know your process, put that out there. If they appreciate it, great. If they don't, they may never, and that's okay. Let that go. Or they may come back to you later and you don't want to have that bridge be burnt.
See, I love that, because I think that as advisors, way too many people act like every single person needs a financial advisor. And the reality of it is that's not true, right? I mean, think about health and fitness, right? Some people need a personal trainer in person. Some people need somebody that just gives them a workout plan, and some people can do it themselves, right? Even if you're going to do 75% as well as an advisor, some people don't necessarily care about everything being optimized and perfect. Where like the revelation I had early in my career is, everything I was taught was to sell. Go to every person I know, go to every networking event, go to every wedding, sell to people on that they need you. And at the end of the day, like everybody deals with finance, and the vast majority of this country needs help with finance. So I feel like it should be our job to attract the people that want our help, not convince people that they need us. Because at the end of the day, some people don't, and other people just need to learn through failure, right? They're going to try to do it themselves. They're going to have a couple of errors and mess up, and they're going to say, okay, great. Now I need to offload this to somebody, or they just hit a different level of their life, or they have kids or a family and they're busier, and it just makes sense to offload it. So I definitely love what you said. And I don't know if this question, or you just geared towards like insurance in general, how it's changed for millennials compared to the generation above?
I would say both insurance and financial advice.
Yeah, I think financial advice is just more accessible now. I mean, I think back to like when my parents were my age, there really was no way to work with an advisor at all, right? I mean, it was, you could get insurance, but then they probably weren't going to talk to you, and they weren't really geared to help. They wouldn't talk to you about your debt or planning for a house or whatever, or you had assets. And now there are advisors and money coaches and people who will serve anybody, regardless of income, regardless of asset size. So to me, I think that the industry is in a way better space than it's ever been. And that's always just because of more access.
Mm-hmm. All right. In order to serve young adults, you first have to get them to talk to you. And you've each developed some innovative ways to reach young adults. I was wondering if you can elaborate on how you reach out to these prospects. And Tom, let's start with you. What are you doing to reach out?
Well, I think it's funny because when you gave the overview of Bryan and myself, I think there's a theme here that we both create a ton of content online, right?
Mhm.
Like I think that is the common theme, that you see all of the advisors that are absolutely killing it in this age range are people who are really great content creators. And I know based on what Bryan's doing, the core of what we're both doing is education. We're not selling through content. We're educating people on all the things that they're facing. So how I look at it is, they say that it's an 18-month lead time between somebody hears of you and wants to work with you, right? So my job isn't to convert anybody from any single post. My job is to educate people, stay in front of them. And so, as they go through and they learn more, eventually they're going to be like, oh, I just got a new job. I have ISOs. Great. Thomas has wrote a ton of posts about ISOs. I'm going to go to him. He's the only financial planner who hasn't been DMing me and trying to sell. So that's my philosophy. Like, I create as much content as I possibly can. I mean, I have a minimum of 3 tweets a day. I have a blog post a week, a podcast a week, a newsletter a month. I post on LinkedIn. Like I'm just super active, and I do no cold outreach at all. I'm averaging about 30 prospects a month at this point that all make, in their 30s, well above $500,000 a year. And all they do is they find me on Twitter, they go apply to work with us online, and then we qualify them and decide whether it's worth having a meeting or if we refer them out to a different advisor.
Mm-hmm. And Bryan, how are you reaching prospects?
Yep. Yeah, it's a great question. I know it's something all advisors are interested in. So I kind of have like a 3-pronged approach. Number one, like when I got started right out of college, like I said, in 2008, it was all about networking. Which was good in the sense of, one, I'm finding prospects, I'm building my practice, but 2, it was extremely good practice for actual, interpersonal relationship building and, sales skills and things like that we all need. So networking, I don't really do so much anymore in the formal sense, but that was a big one starting out. What really, I would say, launched my career was doing seminars. Me personally, I developed a really good niche in the medical and dental space and was doing, seminars throughout the Northeast. And then when COVID happened, our practice actually blew up. because it became conventional to say, all right, forget the seminar, we'll just do a webinar. And then I was able to load my calendar with webinars, whether it was a hospital in my backyard or across the country. It was really no different. And through the different systems we had, we could keep those relationships tight. So I think seminar and webinar marketing got huge, and that's something I've really benefited from. So you have the networking, the seminar / webinar, and then the third one is kind of what Tom alluded to, the content creation online. So I have the Kuderna podcast, and that's not just on finance, that's a podcast on wealth and economics. And so we've had a lot of just guests of every stripe, from economics professors to people like Bas Rutten, UFC champions, and stuff like that people can just learn how to, live a better life. And that's really what I'm after. I always say, money's just one spoke of the wheel. So the podcast, the book, things like that, again, it's just ways to bring new, unique content, stay in front of people. And then LinkedIn has been huge for me all throughout, from when I was starting out to now. It's a great way just to meet people as you grow your network. And it's changed, where I might prospect for a client, I might now prospect for a producer, on Fox Business that now is going to, bring my latest kind of article or whatever to the forefront. So there's just so many avenues out there. I don't think as an advisor, we really have excuses anymore. It's just finding, what can I find most efficient, and then stick to it and really work at it and be patient. And then those things start to kind of feed off of themselves.
Mm-hmm. Bryan, let's talk about your first book called Millennial Millionaire, and it
Yep.
tells readers how they can become millionaires by age 30. So can you run down some of the ways an under 30 can hit that magic million mark?
Yep. Yeah. So that's a good question. And I just want to preface my answer with the subtitle there was brought about by the literary agent I was working with, where they wanted to have like a defined kind of goal, like millionaire by 30. That was a little bit counter to what I preach sometimes, which is like, we don't want to hit a home run real quick. I am more of a long-term planner. But with that said, because I've answered the question many a times, it's a question, a matter of inflows and outflows. Okay. So it's not like you're going to come out of college at 22, making 60 grand a year, and then invest a little bit every year. And then in 8 years, you have $1 million portfolio. That's not realistic. The way that people get there before 30 is through typically a very high income, which you're often going to see through entrepreneurs, sales careers of some sort, even if it's like startups and things. But some of those, avenues are where you see kind of quicker early dollars. The people I work a lot with, physicians, they get up there quickly, but it takes them a long time to reach that starting point. So they could be, the plastic surgeon making 600 grand a year day one, but day one for them after residency and fellowships might be when they're 32. So everybody's a little bit different. And that's where I kind of put the carrot out there, then sometimes pull it back a little bit in the context of everything. And that's why I do kind of speak a lot against like the FIRE movement of financial independence, retire early. I'd rather it just be the FI movement, financial independence. But I'm like, if your goal is to hang it up and leave society and the workforce by 40, it's like, what are you doing? We've got givers and takers in society, and the more givers we have, the better we all are. So that's where I'm like, it's okay to pivot and find your passion, but it shouldn't be, I just can't wait to be done with this so I can just lay on a beach for the next 50 years. That's like just not a good kind of a goal to keep in mind.
Mm-hmm. And Tom, let's turn to you. You wrote an ebook, The Top 23 Questions Millennials Ask Me About Money. What are a few of those top questions?
Yeah, I'll answer that. But real quick, Bryan, I loved what you just said there. I say the exact same things on the FIRE movement, and I love hearing other people think that same way. But I think that using that, we're going to switch it to be more business owner focused, but that was something that we wrote a while back, because I think it's one of the easiest things to answer and grab attention, right? Like if you say, build an emergency fund, somebody's like, whatever. But if you help show the mistake that like hey, if you didn't have an emergency fund, here's what happens, right? You go to credit card debt, you sell your investments during a recession, all of these bad things. I think it's more powerful. And people always ask, you've worked with hundreds of people at this point. What are the biggest mistakes that you see people make and how to avoid them? And so I think first and foremost, I think is like ignoring your cash flow. I'll be honest, I've probably worked with 200 households in the last 5 years on a full financial planning basis. And I would say maybe 5% of them know their cash flow within 10% of what they're spending, right? That's a problem. It's really hard to do anything correctly with your finances if you have no idea where it's going. And I get a lot of people don't like to budget. And so if you don't like to budget, then you have to reverse budget, right? And that means, hey, I make $10,000 a month. I'm going to automate 3,000 towards savings, investments, debt. My job is to spend that 7,000 that's left. That can be a really powerful tool because that's the amount I'm going to have to spend. I can't buy more things if I've spent that money. So I'd say that's a big one. Another one is going into credit card debt for things that you don't need. I really believe nobody should be in credit card debt unless, you're in a really tough place and there are situations that happens. But the thing that kind of bugs me the most is when you see people have a jewelry credit card because they bought certain type of jewelry on debt, or they bought different furniture for their house that they didn't need. They just upgraded on a credit card. Not that you can't use a credit card and pay it off right away, but buying wants to go into debt at 22 to 30% is something that can be absolutely devastating to your finances. So I would say that's two. Another one, a big mistake I see is that people become house poor very fast, right? They think, hey, I got to get the nicest house. I can't afford, or if I went lower than this, I wouldn't really like it. So I'm going to just have to buy more and we'll figure it out. And when you're spending 40% of your, net or even gross pay on your housing costs, you are going to have no money left over to do anything. And I was actually just having this conversation with a client about it. And I've never once met somebody that said, I'm happy to be house poor because my house is nice, right? Mm-hmm. Like where you live matters, but if you can't do anything outside of it, then there's, it's not a very fun life. And then the last two, I would say, have a lot to do with insurance and estate planning. So even though I do not sell insurance, I think insurance is a huge part of a financial plan. And so a lot of people ignore it. They ignore disability insurance, they ignore umbrella insurance, they ignore life insurance. They have the, smallest liability amount on their home and their auto. And the easiest way to lose your money is by not having the proper protection. And then the add-on to that is estate planning, right? If we're working with these young people, you have a house, you have kids, you have a dog, you need to get your estate planning done, right? Like if something happens to you, now everything goes into probate, you didn't have your beneficiaries titled right, you don't have a power of attorney, a medical power of attorney, financial power of attorney, you're setting up your family to have a really tough situation. So to be honest, a lot of the biggest mistakes are really the things that are the least amount of fun, but just because they're not fun doesn't mean they're not important.
Mm-hmm. Now we're going to talk about something that's been in the news for a while, and that's interest rates. How are high interest rates impacting young clients? How can advisors help them through the challenge of buying their first home and getting established financially? Tom, what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, I actually have a full podcast on Friday coming out in this exact topic of interest rates, what we're seeing in the market on every single category, and how to think about home, auto, HELOCs, all that stuff. But to answer your question, I think it's tough, right? I mean, you're looking at, I'm looking to buy a townhouse right now, and mortgage rate's 7.1% on a 5-year ARM. It's even higher, 7.3 on a 30-year fixed. And I think that there's this dangerous game happening where people are willing to buy what they think what they can afford when they can refinance, right? And do we think rates will probably go down over the next few years? Probably. Are rates for sure going to go down over the next few years? No. And so if you sit here and say, well, I could afford this if rates went down to 5%, so I'm going to buy it because I think that's going to happen in the next year, is a very dangerous game. Because if that happens 3 to 5 years from now, and anything happens, somebody loses a job, you're setting yourself up to be in a very tough position. So the way that I'm looking at it is say, accept the rates that are here today. If you're about to move and you need to buy a house and you have a family, then do it, right? Like don't only choose because of rates, because they might not go down and housing prices might not go down. So you need to take the information that's in front of you and find what's affordable to you at today's rate and today's prices. And then if you get to refinance in a year, 2, 3, 4 years, and that decreases your cost, well, then you get to be put in a better position and you have probably hopefully increased income and increased cash flow that can help boost your financial plan and your financial position. So I think that's the best piece of advice I have is like, don't bank on changes. It's the same idea as, oh, I shouldn't buy into the stock market today because I think it's too high and it's going to go down. And look at how the stock market has done this year, right? Nobody knows what changes are coming. And so guessing is just not the game that's going to put you in a good spot.
And Bryan, how are you helping clients deal with high interest rates?
Yep. Yeah. So great question. And, one of the things that might help if I take a step back and just kind of show like my 4-step planning process, because that's how we view each of these decisions. And so the way I set this up, and it really kind of dumbs it down for the client where they can quickly say, okay, I get it. And that's how we start to take action. Is step 1 is protection first. That's where we're doing, some of the disability, life insurance, estate planning, those conversations. Step 2 is building liquidity. And so we want to see that they have that emergency fund. We want to see ideally like a 20% savings rate. So those are just the habits, like the easy rule of thumbs that we'll bring to the table. And then the third step is addressing high interest rate debt. Okay. So and this is before we get to investing and all the fun stuff, which is the 4th and final step. The reason the third step comes before, invest your money everywhere is we can't just move forward, dragging this ball and chain behind us. And really where that's at the kind of the pinnacle is going to be credit card debt. So that's like sometimes the poison to the plan where we'll pump the brakes and say, guys, we really need to focus here. We need to allocate resources towards a credit card that's now maybe at 21% interest. There's nothing we can invest in. Yeah, great. Interest rates have gone up. We can get 4 or 5% on a CD. But if you're losing 21% on the other hand, what does that matter? And so I think that's where we start is like, let's just work within the context we have, focus on kind of the toxic part, the credit cards. And then once we're there and we start to say, all right, well, now I want to use debt. I want to buy a mortgage use a mortgage and buy my house. I would agree with Tom where we don't know what the future holds. I think there probably will be a bit of a pullback in real estate if I had my crystal ball. Inventory's tight, of course, but rates have been high now for a good while, probably going to linger there for a little bit on these mortgages. And so bear in mind, you could always refinance. So if you're like, I finally found my career, I'm married, I know where I want to be, I really want to buy this house. If you've done step 1, 2, and 3, then maybe we can have that conversation. Is it the ideal perfect time to get a 3% mortgage? No, but it's never going to be a perfect time and we have to do the best we can with what we have. And so that's where maybe then we act on it and revisit that. And if we could refinance in 4 years, or whatever it might be, then that's where we just got to stay on our toes.
Okay. So let's talk about life insurance now. How do you convince young adults that they need life insurance, Bryan?
Yep. Yeah. So that's always kind of a fun one. If they are single, no kids, of course, it's a tougher battle. In that regard, what I'm doing is really forecasting, like, where do you see yourself? As we're talking about planning, what's your vision board look like? Where do you want to be someday? And as we start to map that out and they say, I want to own a home. Yeah, I want to get married. I want to have a couple kids. I want to be able to travel a lot. I want to open my own business. All this stuff, these are all future obligations that we're going to have that all come with a very high price tag over time. So I just remind them that, yeah, you may not think you need it today, but you can almost agree with me 100%. You will need it at some point tomorrow. So why not be proactive and save ourselves a lot of money? It's almost a guaranteed savings if we do it when we're 25 versus 30, 35, 40, and so on. So that's where I just try and let them see, both from a saving standpoint. And the fact is, insurance is like the one element that we can't guarantee tomorrow. Right now we might say, hey, you're fine. But tomorrow you could get some diagnosis that changes that whole element of your financial plan forever. So why take that gamble? And that's where we'll start with the life. And the disability is definitely my lead in on that conversation, because whether they're married with kids or it's a single person, we're talking about their lifestyle. Whether you never get married, never have a kid, you want your paycheck every other week. And that's where I think disability, if we had to pick one of the two, is definitely a kind of easy way to push that door open.
Mhm. And Tom, how do you discuss life insurance with a young client?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with a lot of what Bryan said here. I mean, the statistics show that you're way more likely to have a disability than you are to die early. And I mean, I've had plenty of clients who have been denied life insurance because of health. So I think it's a real risk you face. So with my clients, like, I mean, I have clients that are in their 20s making millions of dollars a year right now that are single. They don't really have a life insurance need, but I still think it's my job to educate them on, hey, you're going to have a family, you're going to have kids, you're going to have debt, life insurance is going to be a need. Here's the risk you face by not doing it now. But in all reality, I hate the idea of getting insurance to protect your ability to get insurance, right? Like nobody likes insurance anyways, but I do think it is a real risk. So I think it's something that I educate people on and I let them choose, right? I mean, I've worked with hundreds of people. It's been about 5 people who it's happened that they can't get insured. That's still a decent percentage, right? Enough where it's worth educating people on. But again, I think my job is educate, empower, and give advice and let people ultimately choose the risk that they're willing to face, right? So I think life insurance makes sense. Me personally, I'm not a permanent life insurance fan for a lot of situations. I think there are a few, like I have some ultra high net worth clients where there's estate tax purposes. There's, obviously there's the tax-free growth and use and stuff like that. But to me, I typically like term for most and invest the difference. And then if there is estate planning issues, then we can start to look at permanent life insurance for those people.
Mhm. Something else that's been in the news recently is student loan forgiveness. How have student loans impacted the young adults you serve? What can an advisor do to help them succeed financially when they start out with such a high level of debt? Tom, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's now actually concluded that forgiveness is not happening, which is something that I think a lot of people probably could have predicted. But there are good reform coming, right? There's new income driven plans that are going to make things a lot cheaper and lead to more in forgiveness at the end of those terms. There's public student or loan forgiveness. There's all of these programs that are helpful. The one thing that I was doing with all my clients is we were not paying student loans during this time at all, but we were keeping that monthly payment and saving it in a high yield savings account where you're going to get interest and you're going to have the ability for when student loans come back to put that whole amount down. And it gave you flexibility that if you lost your job, if you had an emergency pop up, you had extra cash that could weather that versus I paid it. Now it's going to be really hard to go back to whoever your service provider was and say, can you give me that money back? But I think the big thing was being used to that monthly payment. To me, that's why the savings kept happening is when that the average I think is $350 monthly payment comes back. Are you going to be able to afford it? Or did you increase your lifestyle in a way that it's going to be really hard to go backwards? But now is the time to really start to think about what you're going to do. So the average refinance rate is about the same as what the average federal student loan is going to be. And so you need to really think about this. Do you want to stick with it or do you want to refinance and do a longer term to reduce the rate? And there's benefits to both sides, right? If you refinance and then any reform, if Democrats win again without getting political and they want to go back to student loans and any changes happen, you miss out on that by refinancing. But if you keep it here and the monthly payment is too high that you can't afford it, that's also tough. The last thing to note is they did say that you will not get in trouble for missing payments over those first 12 months. So they're going to give you time to kind of figure this out. But the time is now to start thinking about your cash flow and figuring out where you're going to pull back from to make sure that you have those savings done. I recommend people like get that emergency fund built up so that way the savings that was going to there can now go to that student loans and not feel like a big change.
Mhm. And Bryan, what's your take on student loan forgiveness and how are you advising clients?
Yep. I think for advisors out there, it's just a great way to kind of open the door and have another conversation. So it's something we ought to be informed of. For the clientele I'm mostly servicing, like I said, in the medical and dental space, and also doing these webinars and things like with the bar associations and other professionals that have gone to a graduate school, it's very common to see them have $300,000-$400,000 of student loans. So when you're getting up to such a big number, another mortgage, for a young professional, what I'm really looking at is, public service loan forgiveness, being able to guide them through all the ins and outs of that program. And if they're going to be a candidate, which often can be the case for some of these physicians that have a really long training schedule, or are they not a candidate because they're going to go into, the private sector or whatever. So that's where usually what I'm doing is just trying to kind of group them into, are we pursuing a particular forgiveness program, or are we able to completely write that off, that we have no shot at it? And then if that's the case, that's where we need to look at, okay, where are some refinance options out there? Who are the lenders that maybe we could work with? And I agree wholeheartedly with what Tom said about practicing smart leverage, where if we just got 3 years of 0% interest loans, why be in such a rush? We can deploy that capital elsewhere, still have access to it, with a little bit of a return, and then use it, like he said, for whatever we want once these loans resume, rather than say we paid it all and then something happens in our life and all of a sudden we want to go back to, Navient or SoFi and say, hey guys, can we get that money back? We didn't mean that. It doesn't work that way. So, leverage is a part of every plan. And when you have a really good opportunity, all things considered, you should take advantage of it.
And one thing to add there, that on the PSLF side, the interesting conversation to have too here is that there are these people that are going to go in and they're going to be in a program that qualifies, but you also have to have the conversation now too of, well, do you want to lock yourself into having to stay there or pick a job that qualifies? And it usually helps to look at what's this cost savings going to be, right? If the cost savings is going to be tons and tons of money, well, it might be worth only picking jobs that stay within the PSLF side or stay where you're at. But if this cost savings is pretty low, it might say, well, let's not go through that program because I don't want to be limited on where I have to work. And these conversations are actually really hard to navigate because you're trying to predict a 10-year period of time and what you're going to do. And I think all of us can attest that your 20s and 30s are not a period of time where the next 10 years go how you think they're going to go.
Yeah. And just one thing to add to that in the insurance context is this has often segued into an insurance sale or client where you have this conversation, they co-signed it with mom or dad, or they already refinanced with a private lender. And guess what? Something happens to you, that bill still may need to be owed. And so that's where life insurance, just like when you go get a mortgage or a large loan, could be applicable, if we have a large debt over our head. And a couple disability carriers have student loan riders now, where not only can we replace the paycheck, but you could also pay the student loan. So again, these are things just to at least give the client information on, and then, begin to expand into their financial plan.
Okay. I said earlier in the webinar that I'm the mom of a millennial, and the young adults I know are thinking about their future retirement a lot earlier than their parents did at that age. So I was wondering, what do advisors need to do to help young adults start saving and planning for retirement when they have a lot of competing financial needs? Bryan, what do you say about that?
Yeah. So I go back to kind of that planning process I mentioned of protection, liquidity, debt, and then wealth management. So I know that, young professionals out there, they're hearing about, oh, is Social Security going to be there for us one day? Is it going to stay solvent? They're hearing on every blog and podcast, oh, do a backdoor Roth IRA. I've been asked 1,000 times about doing a backdoor Roth IRA for people that don't even have to do the backdoor. And so it's like you kind of hear these talking points that you want to know more about. And so that's where I'll take pause and say, let's go back to the process. Let's focus on that. And then once retirement planning, we want to get started on that, but we don't want to put the cart before the horse. And if we go back to kind of the overall plan that I designed, that 20% gross savings rate that I talk about, that's where we start to really incorporate the retirement plan and get to know, what do they have at work? What does the matching program look like on the 401k? Are there deferred comp plans available that would be advantageous for us? So these, again, they're all planning opportunities for us. But it's good. It's a very good thing that they're thinking about it so young. But I don't like to see people saying, oh, I opened up my Robinhood account or whatever, and over here I got $10,000 of credit card debt that I'm still swimming through. It's just, we want to tie it all together. And that's what I'm often reminding them of.
And Tom, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what he said. I think the credit card versus investing is like the easiest point, right? The way that you should view this is, do I have more important uses of my money, or should it be invested? And low interest debt's kind of one of those things where if I have low interest debt, I'm probably going to invest, especially as a young person who can optimize that time in the market. We've all seen time value of money, the difference between being in the market for 20 years versus 30 years versus 40 years. is a huge difference in what that total portfolio value will be come retirement. But if you have credit card debt that's sitting at 25%, you're probably not going to get greater than a 25% rate of return on your dollars. And also the rate of return is variable. The rate of return on that credit card is, how much that's going to cost you. But then I always go, the first place is really your 401k, right? I mean, if you have 100% match to 6% of your income in your 401k, that's actually higher than your credit card is going to be. So that's a point where you say, okay, well, like to me, most people I have do the match from the very beginning, regardless of what else is going on, because if you make 50,000, 6% match, that's $3,000 a year you're going to give up. That's over a whole paycheck that you're passing up on by not taking advantage of it. I like that young people are thinking about retirement, but I also think that some young people are thinking about retirement and then they're like YOLOing investments into, I've had plenty of people come into me that have put tons of money into crypto projects I've never heard of. And that's not retirement planning and investing, right? How I view retirement planning is you should be diversified. You should have low cost index funds or ETFs. And that should be what puts you on track for retirement. If you want to take any risk with the rest of your portfolio, it comes after you're on track for the things that are most important. That is not the start and the hope. Bryan talked earlier about, the millionaire by 30, and it's not actually these big quick wins. Way too many young people think it's these big quick wins, and all that it ends up doing is destroying the wealth that they built.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Before we go to audience questions, I'd like to give a plug to Insurance Newsnet magazine. If you've enjoyed hearing Tom and Bryan and their insights, Tom is one of the people that we interviewed for our July magazine feature on how to work with young clients. Bryan contributed an article on how disability insurance took his practice to a next level. And Bryan was also featured in the field section of our June issue. So if you go to Insurance Newsnet magazine, you can read more about these two advisors. I was wondering, do either of you have anything that you would like to say before we go to the audience questions?
No, I'm excited to answer some questions, and just kind of a shameless plug. I just recommend people go check out, my new book here called "What Should I Do with My Money." I really tried to take everything that I think about over the past 15 years of guiding people to wealth and well-being and understanding money and put it in there. So, I really hope that they can get a lot of good content out of that.
Definitely. The only thing I'll really add is if you're here and you're listening and you're learning, like you're taking the right steps. I mean, the most important thing here on finances is trying to self-educate and maybe hire an advisor if that's what you need. And by putting any building blocks together, you are ahead of the average person. And then I guess I'll shamelessly plug, I have a podcast called The Long Game. It's been out for a while. We'll educate you on everything that has to do with money. And then if you want to follow me on Twitter at T Kopelman, I basically give everything I know away for free on there. Goal is to impact as many people, knowing that we can only work with, maybe 100 to 150 households, but there's a lot of people who are seeking good financial advice from professionals, and way too much of social media is finfluencers who have never helped anybody with money, just putting out definitions and leading people the wrong way.
All right. So now I'd like to turn to Ashley. Do you have any questions that we've received from our audience that you would like to share?
Yeah, that was a lot of great information, guys. We do have just a few questions here. The first one is, with more young people postponing having children or simply not having children at all, how does that impact the role of an advisor?
Do you want to take that, Tom, or should I?
You got it. You can take it.
Yep. So I think, you're seeing a lot of that where people are starting to start their families much later in life. So it does add some pros and cons. On the pro side, they have more disposable capital for sure to work with. So that's where they could get that jump, where now maybe we can put more into the retirement plan or whatever strategies it is that we're devising. On the downside, I just find naturally that if, you have somebody that's single or they're dating and they're, maybe they're not married yet or not having kids, they may not have as much urgency to say, I really need to get my house in order. I need to do all that insurance planning. I got to draft my wills. I got to do all these things. So that's what I would say kind of like takes away some of the value of what we bring to the table is I always tell clients, if at any point I care more about this than you do, we have a very serious problem. And I find that sometimes happen with the people that are like, well, I don't care, I'm never going to have kids. And so that's kind of where I'll work within their domain. And it may not be the big life insurance or disability case. Maybe we're just funding a huge brokerage account or something. So you have to be respectful of what their goals and wishes are. But it definitely does make for maybe not as a complete planning process as, the wholesome nuclear family, let's say.
Yeah, I actually work with a ton of single individuals in their 20s or 30s that are making a lot of money, and the goals are less tangible, right? It's less about, I want to have kids and I need to buy a house, or I want to retire at this age. It's more about how do we help them plan for flexibility to do the things that they want to do that they don't even know they're going to want to do. And going back to the FIRE movement, right? He talked about it's financial independence. And for people without goals, or a lot of different goals because they've accomplished most things, you're really planning for independence and planning for the ability to do what you want in life. And a lot of times it's an advantage. I think, I've seen it too, that there are young people who make a lot of money and they blow it all away because they don't take it seriously. At the end of the day, no, you can't teach anybody that. They have to realize it themselves. And if you're sitting there, again, trying to care about their money more than them, it's going to be a pretty miserable relationship together because, nobody should care about your money more than you.
Great answers. The other question that we have here is, young adults often move from job to job. And I know we touched on that a bit, but how does that impact the kind of advice they need to plan for a future retirement?
I think it does matter, right? Because every time you take a new job, you have completely different benefits. And a big part of our job is helping people understand and manage your benefits. I mean, when you leave one company, you not only have to move your 401k, you have to start your new 401k. You have to value, is there Roth versus traditional? Which one do I use? Is there mega backdoor Roth? How did the investments change? What is the difference between life and DI here? What health insurance plan makes the most sense? Do I go low deductible FSA? Do I go high deductible HSA? Do I use my HSA? Is there benefits to pay for our estate planning through here? So there's a lot that I think comes about where you have to take advantage of it and stay organized versus just like leave everything where it is. And all of a sudden you've had 8 jobs and you have 7 401ks that you can't find. You need to take those proactive steps. And I think you still have to figure out, like, am I job hopping or am I doing this to maximize my career? Because it's a dangerous game to be like, I'm not happy. Maybe this next job will make me happy. And, just keep like frivolously hopping around without knowing what to do versus I'm taking steps to put me into a better position for where I want to be. And I give young people this advice that your next job doesn't have to be the job you love, but at least if you go to that next job and you can figure out the things that you don't like and then go to the next job and figure out how do I have less of the things that I don't like until eventually you find your career. I think Bryan and I might be different where we love what we do and we get to love what we do at a young age. And that is not typically normal for the average person. I look at my friends, I maybe have one other friend that loves what they do, right? And that's okay. The goal is eventually you're getting yourself to that point and figuring out what you do like to do, where every day isn't like, oh, it's Monday again, right? Can't wait for the weekend. That's the people that you find are really going after FIRE because they felt that way for so long.
Yep. Yeah, no, I kind of in agreement on everything you said there. I think from, again, a planning opportunity standpoint, it goes back to the benefits and everything, trying to stay ahead of the curve and let them know you're in a new situation now. How do we capitalize on this? The other thing is that is very sometimes conducive to that junk drawer financial plan where it's like, I've been hopping all around. Like Tom said, I got 7 401ks that I can't even remember where they are, let alone how they're invested. So that's where, as the advisor, you can take a lot of the burden off of the client saying, all right, I'm going to help you through each of these transitions. And then the last thing I would add is I always tell people when there's a lot of things up in the air, when you're in flux, like in a situation like that, you usually want to err to the side of liquidity. So if you don't know what the future holds, that's where we want to have more capital available than perhaps tied up in longer term investments or retirement plans and such. Because usually when we're transitioning, there's unexpected costs, there's changes to lifestyle, moves, things like that, that we all want to be ready for rather than possibly falling back on the credit card.
All right, Susan, that's all we have for today.
All right. Thank you, Ashley. Thank you again to Tom and to Bryan for this great discussion. Thank you for educating us on these crucial issues. And Ashley, will you please close the webinar?
Of course. Thank you everyone for attending today. You will receive an email with the recording of this webinar, and please keep an eye out to register for our next webinar in this series, The Explosive Rise of Index Products, Can They Be Trusted?, which will be on August 9th. Thank you and have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, guys.